The guards checked his cell at 5:45 in the morning. He was there, sound asleep under his blanket, completely still. They moved on, nothing to report. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the sleeping figure in the bed wasn't him. It was a pile of loose floorboards arranged under a blanket, and the man they were supposed to be watching had been gone for hours. That was the first escape. There would be 4 more. This is the story of Yoshie Shiratori, the man Japan tried to lock away and couldn't, the man they called the prison break magician, the man who, armed with nothing but a bowl of soup, a piece of wire, and a mind that never stopped working, made some of the most fortified prisons in Japanese history look like paper boxes. And the most remarkable thing about his story isn't the escapes, it's why he kept doing it. Prison 1, Aomori, 1936. Shiratori was 28 years old when they locked him up. He maintained his entire life that he hadn't committed the crime he was convicted of, that he'd been framed by a local gang and forced to confess under pressure. Whether that's true, we can't say with certainty. What we do know is this: the guards at Aomori prison didn't care. What they cared about was making his life miserable. Nightly beatings, freezing cold, filth, cruelty as routine. Shiratori watched. That was his gift. Not strength, not speed, not connections, just observation. He spent months doing nothing but watching the guards, their patterns, their habits, their blind spots. And he found one. Every morning between 5:30 and 5:45, there was a 15-minute gap in the patrol. 15 minutes where nobody was watching. He needed a tool. The prison gave him one, accidentally. Bathing buckets in the wash house were wrapped with thin metal wire. Shiratori quietly separated a piece of wire from the bucket, hid it, and waited. On the morning of his escape, he picked the lock of his cell door with the wire while his hands shook from the cold. Then he walked out, slipped through a cracked skylight, and disappeared into the city, leaving behind a dummy made of floorboards sleeping peacefully in his bed. Freedom lasted 3 days. He was caught stealing supplies from a hospital and dragged back in chains. They gave him a life sentence this time. Prison 2, Akita, 1942. If Aomori was punishment, Akita was designed specifically to break Yoshie Shiratori. The isolation cell they put him in was a masterpiece of cruelty. Smooth copper walls, impossible to grip, impossible to climb, ceiling so high you couldn't reach it even if you could somehow get off the ground. One tiny skylight at the top, and handcuffs on his wrists at all times. They told him this room had no weaknesses. They were wrong. Every night, Shiratori slipped out of his handcuffs. He had taught himself to dislocate his wrists just enough to slide them free, and then he climbed those smooth copper walls. People who weren't there call this impossible. Shiratori did it anyway, using micro-friction and muscle memory he'd built over weeks of practice. Night after night, he climbed up to the skylight and worked at the rotting wooden frame surrounding it, millimeter by millimeter, night after night. He waited for a stormy night, when the wind and rain were loud enough to cover the sound of his footsteps on the roof, and then he was gone again. 3 months of freedom. Then he made a mistake. He went to the house of the one guard who'd been kind to him, hoping for help. The guard called the police. Shiratori was arrested on the doorstep. He never trusted anyone's kindness again. Prison 3, Abashiri, 1944. Japan's answer to Alcatraz. Abashiri prison sat in the frozen wilderness of northern Hokkaido. It had been built by prisoners, many of whom died during construction, torn apart by bears or wolves or the brutal cold. Those who tried to escape were executed on the spot. No inmate in the history of the facility had ever successfully broken out.
When Shiratori arrived, the guards were so confident in their institution that they put him in iron manacles so heavy that only a blacksmith could remove them. They gave him the thin summer uniform when winter raged outside, and they watched him. So he fed them. Every morning, when the guard passed his meal through the food slot in his cell door, Shiratori would take a sip of his miso soup and spit a small amount onto the iron handcuffs and onto the metal frame of the food slot itself. Miso soup contains salt. Salt corrodes iron. Slowly, invisibly, day by day, the metal weakened. The guards saw nothing. They were looking for a man trying to climb walls or pick locks. They weren't watching a man quietly dissolve his chains with breakfast. On the night of August 26, 1944, a wartime blackout, the city completely dark, Shiratori dislocated both shoulders, bent his body in ways the human form is not supposed to bend, and squeezed himself through the food slot. The slot was designed for a bowl of soup. He spent 2 years living alone in an abandoned mountain mine, surviving on berries, nuts, and whatever he could find. 2 years in the wilderness, in one of the harshest climates in Japan. When the war ended and he finally came down from the mountain, a farmer caught him stealing tomatoes, a confrontation, a death. Shiratori claimed self-defense. The court gave him a life sentence. Prison 4, Sapporo, 1947. Sentenced to die, transferred to Sapporo to await execution. The cell at Sapporo was the most sophisticated containment anyone had ever designed for him. Aware now of his ceiling escapes, they built him a room with no skylights, no loose vents, no accessible windows. The guards watched the ceiling obsessively. Nobody watched the floor. Shiratori had noticed that the guards, so focused on preventing a ceiling escape, had stopped handcuffing him. He used this freedom to pace his cell, every step deliberate, every path carefully chosen. While they watched him walk, he was testing the floorboards beneath his feet, listening for the hollow sound, feeling for the weak points. He built a saw from a scrap of metal taken from the wash basin. He hid his progress inside a tube smeared with excrement, knowing the guards would never inspect anything soiled. He used his soup bowls to dig through the earth below, and he placed a wooden decoy in his bed every night while he worked. 4 months of digging. On March 31, 1947, Shiratori cut through the floor, dug a 2-meter tunnel through the frozen earth using a soup bowl, used the accumulated snow outside the prison wall as a foothold, and climbed over the outer wall into the night. He was 50 meters away from a death sentence, and he walked straight out. The end of running. 9 months later, a police officer stopped a strange-looking man carrying a large bundle near Sapporo. The man gave a false name. The officer checked his bag. Nothing suspicious. He was about to let him go. The man asked quietly, "Could you spare me a cigarette?" It was a small thing, a cigarette, but in post-war Japan, with shortages everywhere, it was a genuine act of generosity. The man smoked it slowly. Then he said, "Thank you. My name isn't what I told you. My name is Yoshie Shiratori. I am an escaped convict." A cigarette broke him. Not iron bars, not prison walls, not chains or copper cells or death sentences. Just one person treating him like a human being. During his trial, Shiratori finally explained publicly what had driven every escape. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't thrill-seeking. It wasn't even survival. It was dignity. "The reason I tried to escape," he said, "was because I was angry at the guards who did not treat prisoners as humans. Every escape was a protest. Every breakout was a man saying, 'You do not get to treat me this way. Not this way. Not any way.'" The High Court of Sapporo heard him. They accepted his testimony. They granted his request to be moved to Fuchu Prison in Tokyo, where the guards, for the first time in his life behind bars, treated him with basic decency. He never tried to escape again. Not once. In December 21, 1961, Yoshie Shiratori walked out of Fuchu prison through the front door, a free man. He'd spent 25 years being told he was uncontrollable, unreachable, unsolvable. He died in 1979 at the age of 71. His ashes were buried in a cemetery overlooking Mount Fuji. Today, one of the prisons he escaped from has a permanent exhibit dedicated to him, a life-size mannequin in his white underclothing caught mid-climb through a skylight. They couldn't hold him when he was alive. They put him in a museum when he was gone. Some people are just impossible to contain.